Struggling to implement authentication on your new application? I'm going to take the anxiety away from implementing access controls on your web app. Access controls are one of the most important security controls to secure your app and to protect your customers. By the end of this video, you'll be able to do the basics such as authentication, authorization, and much more. We're going to achieve this by using Auth0, which is an award-winning company that allows you to manage all things identity related in one central location. Auth0 boasts over 2,000 customers, even OpenAI, the creators of ChatGPT, use it. So in this video, I'm going to show you how to integrate Auth0 in 5 easy steps. Implement MFA in social logins like Google Login, implement user authorization controls for APIs, and finally, configure Auth0 to secure your deployment. Okay, step 1, we're going to log into the Auth0 console and create a new app. We're also going to select single page web application because we're going to integrate Auth0 with a React application. Next, we're going to jump into the settings. Take note of the domain and the client ID. We will use these values in our React application later. Scrolling down, let's add an icon to identify our app on Auth0. Next, we're going to add in the allowed callback URLs, which is actually good security to prevent the spoofing of redirect URI. Same story with the allowed logout URIs to prevent the return to value from being spoofed. And we're going to add in the allowed web origins, which is basically where Auth0 can be called from. We're done for now, so we're going to scroll down and press Save Changes. Okay, now we're going to jump over to the API section where we will access the Auth0 management API. Take note of the identify value because this is the value that we're going to set for the audience later within our code. Step 2, let's download and install the Auth0 React SDK. I'm going to install it at the root level of my application by running npm install. Okay, step 3, we're going to set up our Auth0 JSON configuration file. Recall that we got these values from the Auth0 management console. Next, we're going to create a file called config.js. In this file, we will define a getConfig function that will extract the values from the JSON file and return the domain, client ID, and audience, which we will use later in our code. Okay, step 4. In this part, we will initialize the Auth0 SDK. The first step is to import the Auth0 SDK, the history package, and the getConfig function from the config.js file we just created. We're going to create a new function called onRedirectCallback, which will redirect the user back to the application once the authentication is successful. Then we're going to call the getConfig function and save the results into a config variable. Next, we will pass all that to the provider config object along with some authorization params, which include the redirect URI and the audience. Finally, we call the Auth0 provider React component and wrap it around the app components. To initialize Auth0, we will pass to it the provider config object. Now we jump into the app component in app.js. We will again import the Auth0 SDK and also a simple loading function that just returns an image of a loading wheel. In the app component, we're going to call the useAuth0 hook to retrieve the authentication states, which includes the variables isLoading and error. If it's an error, we return the error message, but if it's just loading, we return the image of the loading wheel. If neither are true, it means that Auth0 has successfully initialized and the user will see your app component. Now that Auth0 has initialized, we need to implement the Auth0 SDK methods in order to do things like login and logout. To do this, we're going to use the Auth0 hook in order to determine whether a user is authenticated or not, given by the isAuthenticated property, as well as the login with redirect and logout functions. In this example, we've created a button which will call the login with redirect function to redirect the user to Auth0 login page if the isAuthenticated property is set to false, which means that the user is not authenticated. And that's it. Once you've done this and you click on the login button, it redirects you to the Auth0 login page where all the authentication is managed by Auth0 in the backend. If I go and click on the profile, you can see that I've successfully authenticated. Now let's talk about implementing MFA and social logins. MFA is ridiculously easy to implement with Auth0. On the management console, go to Security, then Multi-Factor Authentication. Set your MFA type. We'll use one-time password with Google Authenticator. Select Always to ensure that the user is prompted for MFA every time they log in. Then click Save. To demonstrate this, we will create a new account. For this new account, we're going to call it cybersnips2@gmail.com. We're going to give it a password and press continue. Auth0 will now prompt me to register my MFA device. Then I'm going to authorize Auth0 to use my account. I'm going to log out and log back in, provide my credentials, and you can see that Auth0 now prompts me for my MFA one-time password from Google Authenticator. Okay, this time round, I'm going to show you how to implement social logins with Google. You can see here that I don't have Google set up. Getting this set up is as easy as MFA. Just go to Authentication, then Social, and you can see that Google Auth0 is listed over here. You can see that currently no applications are using it, so we're going to toggle it to yes for cyber snips. Now, Google isn't the only social login that you can use. Auth0 provides many. Just go to Create Connection and you can see all the great providers of social login listed over here. Going back to our app, when we log in, you'll now see Google social login listed below over here. So we're going to click on it and you can see that it redirects me to Google's login page. We're going to provide our Google login and password. Then we're going to provide our MFA OTP that we just set up, and you can see that it logs us in with our Google account. Now let's talk about authorization. Authorization gives a specific authenticated user access to certain parts of your website and not others, depending on the permissions that they have. For example, a normal user and an admin will have access to different parts of your web app. In the Auth0 management console, we're going to go over to user management. We're going to hit roles. You can see I've got two roles already created, admin and user, but to create one, just press create role. Okay, now we're going to go to the users tab and assign the user cybersnips2@gmail.com a role. To do this, just click on roles, click assign roles and select the role user. Now you can also assign a default role automatically when a user signs up. To do this, just go to Auth pipeline. We've already got a rule created called assign user role for all enrollments. In this rule, you can see that we're assigning the default role user for anyone who signs up. Now we're going to go back to the rules and we will toggle it to on. The next rule that you can see below is inject role into access token. This rule will inject the role name, which in our case is either user or admin, into the access token so we can use it later when performing authorizations against the API. And now we will enable this rule as well. Okay, let's go back to our web application. We're going to sign up with a new account, this time cybersnips3@gmail.com. We're going to authorize the app, and in top secrets you can see that we've got insufficient privileges. We've printed out the JOT token. You shouldn't do this in production. We're now going to go over to jwt.io and copy and paste the token here in order to see what the contents are. And as you can see, the role user has been printed on the JOT access token, and we can use this later in our code in order to provide authorization. Jumping back to our code editor, what you see here is a simple Node.js Express server which we use to call our APIs. In this, we define a function called checkJWT. This function will check whether the signature on the token is correct based on the key in JWKS URI. The signature is important as it prevents the access token from being spoofed. The next function is called checkRole. This checks whether the role in the JWT access token matches the role required to access the API. You can see this in the app.get function where we call the external API. In this, we also call the checkJWT to check the token, and checkRole where we require the role admin. If a valid token is passed and the user has the admin role, then the API will return a response with HTTP 200 code. We're going to fire up our React app, and you can see that the user that we're currently logged in doesn't have the right permissions. So we're going to log in with a user where we know has the role admin. And you can see that if we go to top secret that the API returns a response successfully. Next, we're going to copy and paste the token again, and we're going to go over to jwt.io. And you can see now that if we paste in the token, that the user has the admin role. Now, if we scroll down a little bit, you can see the signature is verified, but this is a little bit misleading because we haven't specified the public key in the token. The signature is actually getting verified in our code with the checkJWT function, which provides the public key endpoint to validate the signature. Okay, now let's talk about securing your Auth0 deployment. In your Auth0 management console, click on your application, scroll down, and for the ID token, which is your authentication token, let's change that to 86,400 seconds, which is 1 day. We're also going to use refresh token rotation, which means that the same token cannot be used more than once to prevent replay attacks. We're also going to have the refresh token expire in 1 day and expire after an inactivity period of 3,600 seconds, which is 1 hour. Then click Save Changes. Next, go to the API section. We can see that the access token, which provides us with authorization, is set to 300 seconds, which is 5 minutes. This means after 5 minutes, the refresh token will be used to grab a new access token until the refresh token itself expires. Keeping the access token expiry short reduces the likelihood of replay attacks, so this is good practice. It's always a good idea to double check that the config is working. So if we go back and copy the JWT token and go to jwt.io, you can see that the difference between the expiry and the issue at time is exactly 5 minutes. One last thing about token security. If you're storing it as a cookie to help maintain state on your web app, make sure that you've got these security flags set. One of the most common attacks on web-facing applications is credential stuffing attacks undertaken by bots. Luckily, Auth0 has a built-in bot protection mechanism that you can turn on. Just go to Security, then Attack Protection. You can see that bot detection is not currently switched on, so we're going to enable it by going into it. We will enable logs for risk assessments, so we have visibility of the activity in our logs, which we can then use for further analysis. The IP allow list can be used when you're pen testing your application and you don't want Auth0 to block your tests. For the response, we will enforce CAPTCHA, which is that thing that gets you to solve a puzzle, but we will only enforce it for when risky, for password and passwordless flows, because we don't want to make it too annoying for our users. And for CAPTCHA, we will just use Auth0's native CAPTCHA. Now just press save, enable the risk assessment logs, and you can see that bot protection is now enabled. The other great security feature of Auth0 is letting you know if a user has been compromised in a hack somewhere else. To access this feature, just go back to Attack Protection and click on Breached Password Detection. Auth0 security researchers infiltrate criminal communities and gain access to breach data that isn't available otherwise. Or Auth0 can just take data from published breaches on the dark web. Practically speaking, we don't want to block the user if their credentials are found to be breached, but we may want to notify them that they may want to change their passwords. We also want to let our company admins know about these breached credentials so that they can monitor risky accounts more closely. Now just press save and you're all done. Auth0 also gives you the ability to set the password complexity of your database logins. To do this, just go to Authentication, go to Database, click on Username Password Authentication, and now all you need to do is go to the password policy and you can see the slider for the password strength. So we're going to make it excellent and we're going to click on all these great features for securing the password, and we're going to save changes, and that's it. One last thing, Auth0 can also send its logs over to popular platforms such as Datadog, Splunk, and Sumo Logic. And they also provide extensions that allow you to send the logs to other platforms. Like all good things, Auth0 isn't free, but they do give you a 22-day trial period where you can trial all the features. That's it guys, thank you so much for watching my video. Please remember to like and subscribe for more content.